Doris heard the sound coming from the guest bedroom: laughter, voices, movement, and her blood went cold. She'd hidden her daughters in that room hours ago with one rule: stay silent. Now someone was in there with them. She ran down the hallway, heart slamming against her ribs, pushed open the door, and what she saw shattered everything she thought she knew. Doris Ellison woke up at 4:45 every morning in a cramped apartment in Queens that barely fit the three of them. She'd kiss Ava and Bella while they slept, slip out into the dark, and catch the 5:30 train into Manhattan. By 7, she was unlocking the back entrance to Jake Lambert's penthouse, a cold, silent place that stretched out like a museum, beautiful but empty, like no one really lived there at all. Jake Lambert was a tech billionaire, 46 years old, silver in his hair, eyes that never met yours, a man who'd made his fortune and then disappeared into it. No parties, no guests, no laughter. And one rule he never bent: no children. Not ever. He'd made that clear the day he hired her 2 years ago, his voice quiet but final. "I need silence, Miss Ellison. This is not a place for families." Doris had nodded fast, desperate. She needed that job more than anything. The pay was 3 times what she'd been making, cleaning office buildings enough to give her girls a real chance. Ava and Bella were 4 now, identical twins with bright eyes and loud giggles, the best thing that ever came from a man who didn't stick around. Every morning, Doris left them with Mrs. Chen, the 70-year-old neighbor who watched them for whatever cash Doris could spare. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Until November 27th, the twins' birthday. Mrs. Chen called at 6 in the morning, her voice weak and shaking. Pneumonia. She couldn't take the girls. Doris stood frozen in her tiny kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, doing the math in her head. Call in sick, lose the day's pay, maybe the job. Take them to her sister's place in Newark, miss the whole shift, definitely lose the job. Or, she looked at Ava and Bella sitting at the table in their matching unicorn pajamas, eating cereal and humming to themselves, and she made a decision that scared her to her core. "Girls," she whispered, forcing a smile, "how would you like to go on a secret adventure with Mama today?" 2 hours later, she was sneaking them through the service elevator of Jake's building, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She settled them in the guest bedroom at the far end of the penthouse, the one Jake never used, the one he probably forgot existed. She gave them coloring books, snacks, tablets with headphones, stuffed animals, everything she could think of, to keep them quiet. "Mama has to work now, okay?" she whispered, kneeling down to their level. "You stay right here, and stay very, very quiet. Like we're playing hide and seek. Can you do that for me?" "Okay, Mama," they whispered back, eyes wide with the thrill of the secret. Doris locked the door from the outside just in case, and went to work with her stomach twisted in knots. Everything was fine. Until 2 in the afternoon. Jake came home early, something he never did, and Doris was in the kitchen when she heard his footsteps heading toward the guest wing. She heard the door handle turn. She heard his voice say something she couldn't make out, and then she heard it, her daughter's voices. She ran. "But before we begin, click subscribe, hit like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Sometimes God puts people in our path exactly when we need them most, even when we don't see it coming." When Doris burst into that room, she found Jake Lambert frozen in the doorway, staring at 2 identical little girls in red birthday dresses, surrounded by crayons and stuffed animals. Ava looked up at him with her huge brown eyes and said, in the sweetest voice, "Hi, today's our birthday. I'm Ava, and that's Bella. We're 4. Doris couldn't breathe. Her throat closed up, her hands went numb. "Mr. Lambert, I can explain," but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the girls like he'd seen a ghost. His face had gone completely white, drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. "How old did you say?" His voice cracked on the last word. 4, Bella chimed in, holding up 4 tiny fingers, proud and oblivious. And then something Doris never expected happened. Jake Lambert's eyes filled with tears. Actual tears. This man who never showed emotion, who walked through his own home like he was made of stone, his face crumpled. He lowered himself slowly to the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling beneath him, and he whispered, barely audible, 4 years old. Doris stood there, paralyzed, watching as he reached out a shaking hand and gently touched Bella's curls. His fingers trembled, his breath hitched. "Mr. Lambert," she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up at her, and for the first time in 2 years, she actually saw him, not the cold billionaire, not the distant boss. She saw a man drowning in grief, a man so lonely it hurt to look at him, a man who'd built walls so high and so thick that nothing could get through until now. "Don't fire me," Doris whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. I had nowhere else to take them. I didn't know what else to do." "Fire you?" He let out a laugh, broken, rusty, like he'd forgotten how. He shook his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Miss Ellison, He stopped, swallowed hard. "When's their birthday?" "Today, November 27th. He closed his eyes like she'd just stabbed him. When he opened them again, he looked at the girls with something that made Doris's chest tighten. Longing, pain, hope. "Would you like a birthday cake?" he asked softly. Ava and Bella looked at their mother, uncertain. Doris nodded slowly, still not understanding what was happening, still terrified this was some kind of trap. "Yes, please," they said together, grinning. Jake stood up, pulled out his phone, and dialed. His voice was steadier now, controlled. "I need a birthday cake delivered to my penthouse in 1 hour. Make it special. Twin girls, 4 years old. I don't care what it costs. Just make it beautiful." He hung up and looked at Doris. His eyes were red, but his voice was gentle. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first. Is it okay if they stay? Just for today?" Doris didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But she nodded anyway. "Thank you," he whispered. And that's how it started. An hour later, Jake Lambert was kneeling on his living room floor with a 3-tier princess cake covered in pink frosting and edible flowers. Ava and Bella sat across from him, eyes wide with wonder, and he sang "Happy Birthday" so badly, so off-key, that the girls burst into giggles that filled the entire penthouse, a sound that place had never heard before. Doris stood in the doorway, watching her world tilt completely off its axis. The man who never smiled was grinning. The man who hated noise was laughing. The man who wanted nothing to do with children was lighting candles and clapping along with her daughters like this was the best moment of his life. She didn't understand it. She couldn't explain it. But something had shifted, something deep and impossible and terrifying. And as she watched Jake help Bella blow out her candles, as she saw the way his face softened when Ava threw her arms around his neck and said, "Thank you, mister." "Jake," Doris felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long, long time. Hope. The next morning, Doris showed up for work expecting everything to go back to normal. She'd find another babysitter. She'd keep her head down. She'd pretend the birthday party never happened. But when she walked into the kitchen, Jake was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly. "About yesterday." Her stomach dropped. "Here it comes. The firing. The speech about boundaries. If you ever need to bring them again," he continued, his voice soft, almost tentative, "you can. Whenever Mrs. Chen can't watch them, they can stay here." Doris blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I mean it." He looked down at his coffee. "I don't mind. Actually, I'd like that." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, throat tight. And that's how it began. Over the next few weeks, Ava and Bella came with her 3, sometimes 4 days a week, and every single day, without fail, Jake would finish his morning calls and disappear into the guest room where the girls were playing. At first, Doris would peek in to check on them, expecting him to look annoyed or out of place. But he never did. He'd be on the floor with them, building block towers or reading picture books in different voices that made them laugh so hard they'd fall over. He taught them how to play chess badly, because they were 4 and had no idea what they were doing. But he was patient and kind and never once checked his phone while he was with them. The cold billionaire she'd worked for was melting right before her eyes. One afternoon, Doris brought him tea while he was reading to the girls, and he looked up at her with a question in his eyes. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Manage everything alone?" She shrugged, setting the cup down. "You just do. You don't have a choice. Their father, gone before they were born." She kept her voice even, factual. "I've been working since I was 14. You learn to survive." He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "What do you dream about, if you could have anything?" Doris laughed, surprised by the question. "A home." Nothing fancy, just mine. A place where the walls don't shake when the neighbors fight. Where my girls have their own room. Jake nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away somewhere. He started sharing things too. Small things at first. How the penthouse felt like a prison sometimes. How he'd built this entire life and had no one to share it with. Money fixes everything except the emptiness, he said one evening, staring out at the city lights. It just makes bigger. The girls started calling him Mr. Jake. He'd light up every time they said it, like hearing his name in their voices was the best sound in the world. He brought them books, art supplies, sweets hidden in his coat pockets. One day, he showed up with 2 matching pink scooters with helmets and knee pads. "Mr. Lambert, this is too much," Doris started. "Please," he interrupted, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "Let me do this. Let me be part of their lives, even just a little." And Doris felt something shift inside her, a flutter in her stomach when he smiled, a warmth in her chest when he asked about her day like he actually cared. She tried to fight it, told herself she was being foolish, that he was her boss, that this couldn't be real. But then he'd look at her, really look at her, and she'd forget every reason why this was impossible. She was starting to believe, starting to hope, starting to imagine a future she'd never let herself dream about. Until the day her sister Rhonda came to visit and saw Jake on the floor with Ava and Bella, all 3 of them laughing like family. Rhonda showed up on a Saturday afternoon without warning, the way sisters do when they're worried. Doris was in the kitchen preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. Jake had taken Ava and Bella to the living room to teach them a card game, and their laughter echoed through the penthouse. Rhonda walked in, set her purse down, and within 30 seconds her eyes found Jake on the floor with the girls. She watched him for a long moment, watched how Ava climbed onto his back, how Bella showed him her drawing, how he smiled at them like they were precious. "Doris," Rhonda said quietly, "we need to talk." They stepped into the hallway, and Rhonda's face was tight with something that looked like fear. "How long has this been going on?" "He's just being kind, Rhonda. He loves the girls. That's what I'm worried about." Rhonda grabbed her arm, voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me. I've seen this before. Rich white men who get attached to black children, they start thinking they could give them a better life, better schools, better everything. And then they convince themselves the mother isn't good enough." "Rhonda, stop. I'm serious. Next thing you know, they're calling CPS, building a case, claiming you're unfit. They have lawyers, Doris, power, money, everything you don't have." Doris felt her chest tighten. "Jake would never." "That's what they all think." Rhonda's eyes were fierce. "Until they lose everything. Be careful, please." After Rhonda left, Doris stood in the hallway for a long time, her sister's words replaying in her head like a warning she couldn't unhear. That night, she couldn't sleep. The seed had been planted, and once it was there, it started to grow. She began noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way Jake asked detailed questions about the girls' preschool, whether they were learning enough, if the teachers were good. One afternoon, she walked past his office and heard him on the phone. "I'm looking into educational opportunities." "Yes, for young children." Her heart stopped. A few days later, she was dusting his desk and saw a business card partially hidden under some papers. "Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist, consultation services." Why would he need a child psychologist? She told herself she was being paranoid, that Rhonda had gotten into her head. But then she found documents in his study pages about family law, custody arrangements, legal guardianship. He'd printed them out, highlighted sections. Doris felt the walls closing in. She started pulling back, answering his questions with one word instead of full sentences, avoiding eye contact, keeping the girls closer, watching Jake more carefully when he was with them. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Doris, did I do something wrong?" he asked one evening, confusion written all over his face. "Everything's fine, Mr. Lambert," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. The distance between them grew wider every day. The warmth disappeared. The easy conversations stopped. Doris would catch him looking at her with hurt in his eyes, but she couldn't explain. He couldn't tell him that she was terrified he was building a case to take her daughters away. 2 weeks later, she made her decision. She couldn't risk it, couldn't risk them. She walked into his office and placed an envelope on his desk. Her resignation letter. Jake looked up, stunned. "What is this? I need to find something else." "I'm sorry." "Why? Doris, what's going on?" She turned to leave, but he stood up, blocking her path. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Just tell me what happened. What did I do?" She wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to tell him everything, the fear, the warnings, the documents she'd found. But instead, she just shook her head and walked out, leaving him standing there with her resignation in his hands and questions he'd never get answered. At least, not yet. Jake didn't accept the resignation. He showed up at her apartment building in Queens 2 days later, standing in the hallway outside her door, knocking gently. "Doris, please, just talk to me." She stood on the other side, with her hand pressed against the wood, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't open it. Couldn't open it. Inside, Ava started crying. "Mama, why can't we see Mr. Jake?" "Is that him?" Bella's voice, small and confused. "Mr. Jake's here." Doris closed her eyes, heartbreaking. "Please," Jake said through the door, his voice cracking. "I don't understand what I did wrong. Just tell me." But she stayed silent until she heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. For 3 days, she avoided him, took different routes, didn't answer her phone. But Queens wasn't that big, and Jake wasn't giving up. On the 4th day, he was waiting in her building's stairwell when she came home from a job interview. She turned to leave, but he stepped in front of her. "No," he said firmly. "You're going to tell me what's happening." And something inside Doris snapped. "You want to take them from me?" The words exploded out of her, months of fear and exhaustion finally breaking free. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. I've seen it. The questions about their school, the psychologist's card on your desk, the custody law, documents you printed out." Jake's eyes went wide. "What? You think I'm stupid? You got close to them, made them love you, and now you're going to say I'm not good enough, that you can give them more, better schools, better life, and then you'll call someone, build a case, take them." "Doris, stop." His voice was sharp, almost angry. "Have you lost your mind? Then explain it." Her voice broke. "Explain why you're researching schools and talking to lawyers." "Because I wanted to help you." He ran his hand through his hair, looking desperate. "I thought maybe I could pay for a better preschool, maybe help with their education. I thought, God, Doris, I thought maybe you'd let me be their godfather or something. But I never, not once, thought about taking them from you." "Then why?" "Because you're their mother." His voice echoed in the stairwell. "Because they need you, not me. Because no amount of money or power could ever replace what you give them every single day." Doris felt her knees go weak. Jake took a shaky breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, broken. "Do you want to know the real reason I care so much?" She couldn't speak, just nodded. "Because I fell in love with the 3 of you." The words came out raw, honest. "With Ava and Bella, yes. But with you, Doris. The way you fight for them, the way you love them, the way you make that penthouse feel like a home instead of a tomb. I fell in love, and I didn't know how to tell you." Silence. Doris stared at him, tears streaming down her face, and the truth came tumbling out before she could stop it. "I love you too." His head snapped up. "But I was terrified," she whispered. "You have everything, Jake. Power, money, lawyers, influence. And I have nothing. I clean houses for a living. I can barely afford rent. How was I supposed to believe you wouldn't wake up one day and realize you could do better for them without me?" Jake stepped forward and took her hands in his. "You have everything, Doris. You're their mother. You're the woman I love. You're the reason I started believing life could be good again." "I was so scared," she breathed. "I know." He pulled her close, and she let herself collapse against him. "I know." They stood there in that stairwell, holding each other, while the world kept spinning outside. And for the first time in weeks, Doris let herself breathe. Maybe this could work. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. She wanted to believe it so badly, it hurt. 2 weeks passed, and something fragile and beautiful began to grow between them. Doris went back to work, but everything was different now. Jake would find her in the kitchen and talk to her, really talk, not just polite employer small talk. He asked about her dreams, her childhood, what made her laugh. She told him things she'd never told anyone, about her mother who'd worked 3 jobs, about being hungry as a kid and swearing her daughters would never know that feeling. And he listened like every word mattered. They were careful around each other, testing the ground like it might break beneath them. But there were moments, his hand brushing hers when he handed her coffee, the way he'd smile when she walked into a room, the quiet conversations that stretched long into the evening after the girls had fallen asleep. Doris still insisted on working. "I don't want to depend on anyone," she told him firmly. "I need to take care of myself." "I know," he said softly. "That's one of the things I love about you." Things felt hopeful, gentle, new. And then Jake had to fly to London for business. 5 days, he said, kissing her forehead before he left. "I'll call every night. And I'm giving you full access to the whole penthouse, all of it. Make yourself at home." "We'll be fine," she assured him. "I'll bring the girls something special," he promised, ruffling Ava's hair. Bella wrapped her arms around his leg and didn't want to let go. The first 2 days went smoothly. Doris cleaned, played with the girls, and talked to Jake on the phone every evening. He sounded tired, but happy, asking about every little detail of their day. On the 3rd day, Doris was dusting the hallway at the far end of the penthouse when she noticed something she'd never seen before. A door. Locked. She'd worked here for 2 years and had never noticed this door. It wasn't hidden, exactly, but it blended into the wall in a way that made it easy to overlook. She tried the handle. Locked. Something about it bothered her. Why would one room be locked? What was he hiding? She told herself to leave it alone, to trust him, but Rhonda's voice crept back into her mind. "Be careful. Rich men with secrets." She searched the kitchen drawers and found a small key in a jar near the window. Her hands were shaking when she slid it into the lock. The door opened, and Doris staggered backward, hand over her mouth. It was a nursery, complete and perfect. Pink walls, 2 white cribs with delicate bedding, a rocking chair by the window, shelves lined with children's books, organized by size, a toy chest overflowing with unopened gifts, still in their packaging, stuffed animals arranged on a shelf, like they were waiting for someone, and on the wall, in elegant gold script, Ava and Bella, her daughters' names. The room spun. Doris gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Rhonda was right. She'd been right all along. He'd been planning this, planning to take them. He'd even prepared their room. How long had this been here? How long had he been setting this up? The business trips, the legal documents, the questions about school. It all made sense now. He was building a case, preparing a home for them, getting everything ready to prove he could provide better. "How could I have been so stupid?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How could I have believed him?" She didn't think, didn't call, didn't leave a note explaining. She just ran. She picked up Ava and Bella from preschool early, told them they were going on a trip. She packed everything they owned into 2 suitcases, clothes, toys, the few photographs she had. Her hands shook so badly she could barely zip the bags. She left 1 sentence on a piece of paper on the kitchen counter. "Don't try to find us." Then she took her daughters and disappeared. By nightfall, they were in a cheap motel room in Philadelphia. The girls were confused, asking questions she couldn't answer. "Where's Mr. Jake?" Ava asked, her little voice breaking. "Why did we leave?" Bella whispered. Doris pulled them close and cried until she had nothing left. She'd done it again. Let fear destroy something beautiful. But this time, she told herself, she'd done the right thing. She'd protected her daughters, even if it meant breaking all 3 of their hearts. Jake came home from London with gifts for the girls, a stuffed double-decker bus for Ava, a miniature Big Ben snow globe for Bella. He walked into the penthouse, calling their names, smiling, ready to tell them about his trip. The silence hit him first. Then he saw the note on the counter. "Don't try to find us." 4 words that destroyed him. He called her phone, disconnected. He went to her apartment in Queens. The landlord said she'd moved out 3 days ago, paid what she owed, and left no forwarding address. He stood in the empty hallway where they'd held each other just 2 weeks before, and something inside him shattered. He hired a private investigator, searched hospitals, shelters, schools. Nothing. Finally, desperate, he tracked down Rhonda. She opened her door and saw his face pale, eyes red and sunken, like he hadn't slept in days, and she almost felt sorry for him. "Where is she?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I don't know. Please." He was begging now. "I need to explain. She found something in my house, didn't she? The nursery." Rhonda's eyes narrowed. You prepared a room with her daughter's names in it, and you're surprised she ran. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. You should have been honest from the start. Now she's gone, and honestly, I think she made the right choice. Jake closed his eyes. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never meant to hurt her. But Rhonda just shook her head and closed the door. 3 weeks. That's how long Doris lasted in Philadelphia before the money started running out. The motel room was $40 a night cheap, but it added up fast. She'd found work cleaning offices at minimum wage, but it barely covered food and rent. The bills were piling up, her savings were nearly gone. But worse than the money was watching her daughters fade. Ava stopped singing. Bella barely spoke. They asked for Mr. Jake every single day, their little voices getting quieter each time, like they were giving up hope of ever seeing him again. When can we go home, Mama? Ava asked one night, curled up on the worn motel bed. Doris didn't know how to answer. She didn't know where home was anymore. At night, when the girls finally fell asleep, Doris would lie awake staring at the ceiling, and a voice in her head wouldn't stop whispering, "What if you made a mistake?" She remembered the way Jake had looked at her daughters, not with greed or calculation, but with pure love. The way he'd gotten down on the floor with them every single day, even when he was exhausted from work. The way he'd cried when he first met them. 4 years old, he'd whispered. Why had that broken him so completely? The nursery, the names on the wall. There had to be more to it, but she'd been too afraid to ask, too afraid to trust. Maybe Carolina planted a fear that didn't exist, she thought. But then she'd remember the locked room, and the fear would flood back. 1 month after she'd fled, Doris was walking back from the corner store with a bag of groceries when a black BMW pulled up to the curb. Her heart stopped. Jake got out of the car, and she barely recognized him. He'd aged 10 years in 4 weeks. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Doris," he said quietly, "please, just let me explain." She tried to walk past him, but he stepped in front of her, not threatening, just desperate. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and his voice was so broken it made her chest ache. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Just let me tell you the truth." She looked at him really, looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her stop. Not anger, not manipulation, just pain. Deep, unbearable pain. "There's a coffee shop across the street," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, against every warning Rhonda had ever given her, Doris nodded. 5 minutes, she said. That's all. They sat in a corner booth at the coffee shop, as far from other people as they could get. Jake's hands trembled as he held his cup. Doris sat across from him, arms crossed, guarded. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Talk." Jake closed his eyes and took a breath so deep it looked like it hurt. 4 years ago, he began, voice barely steady, "I was married to a woman named Emma." Doris felt something shift in her chest, but she stayed quiet. "We were happy, really, truly happy. The kind of happiness I didn't think was real until I met her." He smiled, but it was sad, distant. "She got pregnant with twins. We were over the moon. We picked out names together, painted the nursery ourselves, stayed up late, reading parenting books and laughing at how unprepared we were." His voice cracked. He stopped, steadied himself. "We chose the names Ava and Bella." Doris's breath caught. The due date was November 27th. Emma went into labor that morning, and we rushed to the hospital. We were so excited. Scared, but excited. He paused, staring down at his coffee like he could see it all playing out in the dark liquid. But there were complications. Things went wrong fast. They tried everything, emergency C-section, transfusions, everything. But he couldn't finish. Didn't need to. "Emma didn't make it," he whispered, "and neither did our daughters. I lost all 3 of them in one night." Doris felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I couldn't go into the nursery after that," Jake continued. "Couldn't even look at the door. I locked it and threw away the key. For 4 years, that room stayed sealed. I'd walk past it every day and pretend it didn't exist. Pretend I hadn't lost everything that mattered." He looked up at her now, eyes red and broken. "And then I met your daughters, November 27th, their 4th birthday, and one of them looked up at me and said, 'I'm Ava,' and the other said, 'I'm Bella,' the exact names Emma and I had chosen. on the exact day I'd lost my family. "Oh God," Doris whispered, covering her mouth. "I wasn't planning to steal your daughters, Doris." His voice broke completely now. "I was finally able to open that door again because of them. They gave me life again, hope again. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel like I was drowning." He reached across the table, but didn't touch her, just let his hand rest there, open, offering. "I thought maybe I could transform that space of grief into something beautiful. Prepare it for the family I dreamed of building with you. It was supposed to be a surprise, a way of showing you I was serious, that I wanted a future with all 3 of you." "I was so wrong," Doris choked out. "Jake, I'm so sorry. You weren't wrong to be afraid," he said gently. "You were protecting your daughters. I understand that. But I need you to understand something too." He leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with truth. "I didn't want to replace Emma and my daughters. I wanted to honor their memory by loving again, by being the father I never got to be. With you. Together. As a family." Tears streamed down his face now. "But if you don't want that, I understand. Just please, don't keep Ava and Bella from me. Let me be in their lives, even if it's just visits. Even if it's just—" "I want that family too," Doris interrupted, her voice shaking. "I want you. I was just so scared of losing them that I destroyed the one thing that made all of us happy." They reached for each other at the same time, meeting in the middle of that table, holding hands like lifelines. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." And in that small coffee shop in Philadelphia, 2 broken people began to heal. That evening, Doris brought Jake back to the motel. When she opened the door, Ava and Bella were sitting on the bed watching cartoons. They looked up, and time stopped. "Mr. Jake," they screamed and launched themselves off the bed, running so fast they nearly tripped over each other. They threw their arms around him, and Jake dropped to his knees, pulling them close, his whole body shaking. "I missed you," he whispered into their hair. "I missed you both so much." "We thought you left us," Bella said, her little voice muffled against his chest. "Never," he said fiercely. "I will never leave you. I promise." Doris watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was right. 3 days later, they moved back into the penthouse. Jake insisted Doris didn't have to work anymore, but she refused. "Not yet," she said. "Let me do this my way." "Okay," he said softly. "Whatever you need." That first night back, after the girls had fallen asleep in the guest room, Jake took Doris's hand. "There's something I need to show you," he said quietly. "If you're ready." She knew what he meant. They walked down the hallway together, and he opened the door to the nursery. Doris stepped inside, but this time, she saw it differently. "This rocking chair," Jake said, his voice gentle, "was Emma's. Her grandmother gave it to her when she found out she was pregnant. She used to sit here and read to her belly, talking to the babies like they could already hear her." He picked up a soft blue blanket from one of the cribs. "I bought this the day we found out we were having twins," Emma cried, happy tears for an hour. Doris listened, heartbreaking and healing at the same time. "When I met Ava and Bella," Jake continued, "it was like God gave me a second chance at the family I'd grieved for. Not to replace what I lost, never that, but to honor Emma's memory by loving again, by opening my heart when I thought it was dead forever." He turned to Doris, taking both her hands. "This room wasn't a threat. It was a shrine I'd been able to open again because your daughters brought light back into my life. Because you brought light back into my life." Doris stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "I understand now," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it before." "You were protecting them," he said, holding her close. "That's what good mothers do." They stood there in that room, surrounded by memories of the past and hopes for the future, and Doris finally let herself believe. Believe in second chances. Believe in healing. Believe that sometimes, when everything falls apart, God puts the pieces back together in a way more beautiful than you ever imagined. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Jake pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Now," he said, smiling through tears, "we build something new, together," and for the first time in a long time, Doris wasn't afraid. She was ready. 8 months later, Doris stood in a small room at the edge of Central Park, looking at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a simple white dress, nothing fancy, nothing she couldn't afford on her own, because that mattered to her. Her hair was pulled back softly, and in her hands she held a small bouquet of wildflowers. Rhonda stood behind her, fixing her veil, tears already streaming down her face. "I was wrong about him," Rhonda whispered. "I'm sorry I scared you." "You were protecting me," Doris said, squeezing her sister's hand. "That's what family does." Outside, under a canopy of trees with the city humming quietly in the distance, Jake Lambert stood waiting. He wore a simple suit, no tie, and when Doris walked toward him with Ava and Bella as her flower girls in white dresses with red bows, his face broke into the kind of smile that makes you believe in miracles. The ceremony was short. Just a few close friends, a minister who spoke about second chances and the kind of love that heals old wounds. When Jake said, "I do," his voice cracked. When Doris said it back, she meant it with every piece of her heart. And when the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Jake pulled her close and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for not giving up," she whispered back. The reception was at the penthouse, but it didn't look like the cold, empty place Doris had first walked into years ago. Now the walls were covered with photographs Ava and Bella at the park, family dinners, birthdays, ordinary moments that meant everything. The refrigerator was cluttered with crayon drawings held up by magnets. Toys were scattered in corners. Laughter filled the rooms. It was alive. As the evening wound down and the last guests left, Doris found Jake sitting on the couch, looking tired but happy. The girls had changed into their pajamas and were eating leftover cake at the coffee table, their faces covered in frosting. Bella set down her fork, climbed into Jake's lap, and looked up at him with those big brown eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and sweet, "can we have cake for breakfast tomorrow?" Everything stopped. Jake froze. Doris froze. It was the first time either girl had called him that. Ava's head snapped up, and she scrambled over, climbing onto his other knee. "Please, Daddy?" Jake looked at Doris, and tears were streaming down his face, the kind of tears that come from a place so deep you didn't know it existed. Doris nodded, crying too, her hand over her heart. "Yes, my girls," Jake whispered, pulling them both close. "We can have cake whenever you want." He held them like that for a long time, and Doris watched, knowing she was witnessing something sacred. A man who'd lost everything, finding a family he never thought he'd be allowed to have. Two little girls who'd never had a father, learning what it felt like to be cherished. A woman who'd been afraid to trust, discovering that some people really do stay. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep in their room, the nursery, transformed now into a space full of life and laughter and love. Doris and Jake stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Emma would have loved them," Jake said softly. "I think she'd be happy you found your way back," Doris whispered. He pulled her close. "Every year on November 27th, I used to dread waking up. It was the worst day of my life. And now?" He smiled. "Now, it's the day I celebrate two little girls who taught me that love doesn't replace what you've lost. It makes room for something new, something just as precious." Doris rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure, and she thought about grace, how it shows up in the last place you expect, how it takes broken people and broken stories and weaves them into something beautiful, how God doesn't always heal the way you think he will. Sometimes he brings you something entirely different, entirely better. Family isn't about blood, she realized. It's about who stays, who chooses you, who loves you even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. And every year after that, on November 27th, Jake Lambert knelt on the living room floor with a birthday cake, singing off-key, while Ava and Bella clapped and laughed and called him Daddy, transforming the worst day of his life into the most beautiful one. Because that's what love does. It redeems, it heals, it makes all things new. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to trust it, it gives you a second chance at the family you thought you'd lost forever. "Don't touch him!" Lillian's voice shook the marble walls of Rose Hill Mansion as she planted herself between the masked intruder and the billionaire's son, wielding a frying pan like a weapon. Gregory Johnson stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase slipping from his hand, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. His maid, his invisible employee, had just saved his son's life. And the man she knocked out. He wasn't just an assassin. He was sent by someone Gregory trusted with everything. Nestled in the rolling hills of Geneva, New York, Rose Hill Mansion stood like a monument to old money and careful control. With white columns that scraped the sky and fireplaces that had burned through centuries, it was the kind of home that looked like it could never be touched by chaos. But inside, it was hollow. Beautiful, but hollow. And Lillian Richardson could feel that hollowness every time she swept the grand staircase. She wasn't new to houses like this, or to being invisible in them. She was the kind of woman people passed without seeing until they needed something cleaned, folded, or fixed. But over the past 3 months at Rose Hill, she'd become something more, especially to one little boy. Alex Johnson, 6 years old, curly hair, sharp as a tack, and lonely. Very, very lonely. His mother had died in a car crash 2 years earlier. His father, Gregory Johnson, tech mogul, billionaire, emotionally unavailable, and constantly too busy. If there was one thing Lillian had learned in all her years cleaning mansions, it was this: money doesn't keep children warm at night. "Miss Lillian, do you think I'm brave?" Alex asked one afternoon, peeking over his bowl of cereal. She smiled gently, tucking a napkin into his shirt collar. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, baby. Even when you're scared, you still smile." And for a split second she saw the corners of his mouth turn upward. That was all the reward she ever needed. That morning, Gregory had left at 5 a.m. sharp. Back-to-back investor meetings in Manhattan, private jet, tailored suit. His goodbye was a nod to his assistant, not his son. Rose Hill went silent again. Lillian busied herself with laundry on the second floor. Alex was in his playroom, reenacting a superhero scene with his stuffed bear, Captain Claw. The fire was lit downstairs. Warmth filled the mansion. Everything felt okay, until it didn't. A subtle shift, a creak where no floorboard should have creaked. Lillian's hand froze over a folded towel. Her eyes darted to the hallway. Then she heard it, Alex's voice. Soft, confused. "Hey, who are you?" Her blood ran cold. She moved fast, quietly. Years of survival had taught her how to read danger without making a sound. She reached the main foyer just in time to see it. A man, tall, dressed in black tactical gear, crouched near the playroom entrance. He was reaching into his coat. Instinct overrode fear. Lillian grabbed the first thing she could from the kitchen counter, a frying pan, and ran. "Don't touch him!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the mansion like a knife. The intruder turned just in time to meet cold metal to his temple. He dropped. Hard. Alex screamed. Lillian shielded him, and that's when the front door opened. Gregory Johnson stepped inside, one hand holding a teddy bear he picked up from a boutique in Manhattan, the other clutching his briefcase. His gaze landed on the scene. His son, crying. His maid, panting. A man, bleeding on the floor. And the weapon? A kitchen frying pan. His brain couldn't keep up with his eyes. This wasn't business. This wasn't stock market logic. This was raw, real, unexplainable, and it would change everything. If your heart skipped even once during that scene, if you felt even a flicker of fear for that little boy or respect for the maid who stood her ground, then ask yourself, why aren't you subscribed yet? Real stories like this don't just entertain, they stay with you. So don't just watch, join the family, hit subscribe. We've only just begun. The silence that followed was louder than the scream that came before it. The frying pan slipped from Lillian's fingers and hit the marble floor with a dull metallic thud. The sound echoed across the mansion like a church bell tolling for the dead. Gregory Johnson still hadn't moved. He stood in the open doorway, rain speckled across his tailored coat, briefcase half open at his side, the teddy bear soaked and dangling from his hand. His eyes weren't on the intruder. They were locked on her, the maid, the one he barely remembered hiring, the one who had just saved his only son's life. Lillian was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. She dropped to her knees beside Alex, pulling him into her arms as he sobbed against her chest. His tiny fists clung to her shirt, like she was the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "It's okay, baby, I've got you." "You're okay," she whispered, rocking him gently. Her voice cracked, but her hands didn't. That's when Gregory finally spoke. "What the hell happened?" It wasn't anger, it was disbelief. He stepped forward slowly, eyes flicking between his son, the man on the floor, and Lillian. She didn't answer right away. She was too busy checking Alex's face, his arms, his legs, making sure he wasn't hurt. It wasn't until she was certain, absolutely certain, that she looked up at Gregory. He was going to kill him. Her voice was firm, low, controlled. Gregory's heart stopped. "What?" "I saw him. Masked. Armed. He was reaching for something. Alex was right there. I did what I had to do." Gregory's face tightened. He dropped the bear and strode toward the unconscious man. Kneeling down, he checked for a pulse. Still alive. A weapon lay inches from the man's open hand. A small handgun with a silencer. Gregory recoiled. This wasn't a random break-in. It wasn't a robbery. This was a hit. Inside his own home. Targeting his son. A sudden wave of nausea crashed into him. He staggered to his feet, ran a hand through his damp hair, and looked around, really looked. Alex, clinging to Lillian, Lillian holding him like her own. The gun, the body, the frying pan, his mansion once pristine, now stained with something raw. "Why?" he started, then stopped. His voice broke. "Why would someone do this?" Lillian stood slowly. She held Alex's hand, but never looked away from Gregory. "I don't know, sir, but it wasn't random." A beat passed. "And it wasn't petty." Gregory, quiet, shaken. How long was he in the house before you saw him?" Lillian, "I don't know. A minute? Less. I was folding laundry upstairs. Then I heard Alex talking to someone he didn't recognize." Gregory, "And you just," gesturing to the pan, "ran in?" Lillian, "I ran because no one else would have gotten there in time." Gregory looked away, shame crawling up his throat. She was right. He wasn't there. The guards weren't there. The cameras didn't alert anyone. The system he paid millions for had failed. But she hadn't. Lillian stood in front of that man, with nothing but a cast-iron pan and courage, and Gregory couldn't look her in the eyes. Not yet. He turned toward the hallway and barked into his Bluetooth headset. "Security, lockdown, call the police, no one comes in or out. I want this man alive and I want to know who sent him now." As he spoke, Lillian knelt again beside Alex. His breathing had steadied. He looked up at her with wide, wet eyes. "Miss Lillian, are you going to leave?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "No, baby, I'm not going anywhere." From the corner of the room, Gregory heard it. That softness, that motherhood, something he hadn't heard in that house since his wife died. Something he hadn't given Alex in months, maybe years. He looked at Lillian again, and for the first time he didn't see a maid. He saw a woman who had just changed everything. The flashing lights from the police cruisers turned Rose Hill's manicured driveway into a crime scene. Uniformed officers stepped over the estate's marble threshold with measured urgency, their radios hissing with clipped phrases. The once silent mansion now pulsed with the hum of investigation and suspicion. But inside, it was quieter than ever. Gregory Johnson stood by the fireplace staring into the flames, hands clenched behind his back. His custom Italian suit was still damp from the rain, but he hadn't moved to change. He hadn't said much at all. He just stood there, like a man trying to understand how his fortress had cracked. Behind him, Lillian sat on the velvet sofa, arms wrapped around Alex, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her uniform was wrinkled, hair a mess, hands still trembling from the weight of everything that had happened. A detective stepped into the room, notepad in hand. "Mr. Johnson, I need to ask again. Do you know anyone who would want to hurt your son?" Gregory turned slowly. His jaw was tight, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "No, absolutely not." "Any family disputes? Custody battles? Former employees?" "None. I live a private life." The detective raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. He scribbled something, then turned to Lillian. "And you, Miss Richardson, did you see his face?" Lillian nodded slowly. He wore a mask, but I saw his eyes. Light brown, sharp, professional. He didn't hesitate. She looked down at Alex, her fingers brushing over his curls. He wasn't here to rob us. He came for the boy. The room sank deeper into stillness. After the officers cleared the area and the intruder was taken away in an ambulance, still unconscious, Gregory finally spoke. "You should go." Lillian's eyes lifted sharply. "Excuse me?" He looked away. "You've been through a lot. I'll have security take over. You're not expected to stay." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "You think I'm walking away now?" He turned toward her. She stood slowly, setting Alex gently against a pillow. "That little boy just watched a man try to kill him in his own house," she said, her voice rising. "You think he needs bodyguards in suits with guns, or someone he trusts?" Gregory's shoulders tensed. "It's not about that. It's liability, publicity. You were just involved in a physical confrontation. I saved his life." Silence. "You think your reputation is the one at risk here?" she continued. "I put myself between your son and a bullet because no one else was there. Not your cameras, not your guards, not you." That one landed. Gregory flinched, and for a moment he looked like a man being told a truth he'd never dared consider. "You know what I think?" she added, quieter now. "I think you're scared to face the fact that someone inside this house may have let that man in. I think you're afraid to ask who has access. And I think you're wondering—" She stepped closer. "If you were the target, and not your son." "Gregory, you don't know anything about me." Lillian, "Maybe not, but I know what guilt looks like." Gregory, tense. "This isn't guilt. It's control. Or lack of it." Lillian, softly. "Same thing." Gregory turned away, the fire's reflection flickering in his eyes. She was right. Every inch of his world was built on structure, walls, systems, protection, and tonight it had all shattered, by one man, and one woman who wasn't supposed to matter. Later that night, Gregory sat in his study, surveillance footage pulled up across multiple monitors, but none of it helped. No footage of the intruder entering, no breach, no break-in. Whoever sent him had access. He thought of the people who knew the codes, people who'd worked in the house longer than Lillian, people who'd been with his company for years, people he trusted. His stomach turned. In the guest wing, Lillian lay awake on a small daybed, eyes on the ceiling. She couldn't sleep, not yet. Not while that boy was still in shock. Not while the question of why hung heavy in the halls. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going anywhere. Not until Alex smiled again. Not until she knew he was safe. At this point in the story, what would you do? If you were Gregory, would you trust her? If you were Lillian, would you stay? Drop your answers in the comments. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button, not just because it helps us, but because stories like these deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear them. Lillian should have gone home. She knew it. Her shift had technically ended before the chaos. Her clothes were stained, her hands ached, and the kind of adrenaline that makes you swing a frying pan at a trained killer. That had long since crashed. But she didn't leave. Because Alex hadn't let go of her hand. The paramedics had cleared him, no physical injuries, just shaken, traumatized, clinging to her like his soul had been stapled to hers. So she stayed. And Gregory hadn't said a word about it. In fact, he hadn't left either. They were both still at the mansion, both on edge, both not speaking about the one thing they couldn't stop thinking about: who ordered the hit. That night, the guest wing's lights stayed on. Lillian sat in a plush armchair, watching over Alex as he slept in her bed, too scared to be alone in his. She had brushed his hair back, sang him a soft hymn her grandmother used to hum, and promised, "I won't let anything happen to you." Outside the room, footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy, hesitant. Gregory. He stood at the doorway, hand against the frame, eyes low. "He asleep?" She nodded. "Finally." He stepped inside, slowly. The distance between them was uncomfortable, like two strangers at a funeral who've shared a secret neither wants to revisit. Then, softly, "Thank you for not leaving." She looked up at him, surprised, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Not like a billionaire, not like a boss, but like a father. A man who had finally seen something he couldn't ignore. "He needed someone," she replied. Her voice didn't accuse him, but it didn't protect him either. He sat across from her in the chair beside the window. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence stretched, but it wasn't cold anymore, just real. "Gregory, do you have kids?" Lillian, "I did." A pause. "He'd be 9 this year." Gregory blinked, straightening slightly. She didn't offer more, and he didn't push. The silence returned, but this time it was respectful. He looked at Alex's sleeping face. "He hasn't slept this peacefully in months." "He just needed to feel safe," Lillian whispered. Gregory's eyes moved to her. Not the uniform, not the job. Her. "I'm not sure I even know what that means anymore." A soft creak of the house, and they both looked up. Even in a mansion this size, the walls felt tighter now, like the house itself had leaned in to listen. "Do you have a guest room near here?" Lillian asked. "I don't want him waking up alone." Gregory hesitated, then stood. "You can take the one across the hall. I'll have someone bring you fresh clothes." A beat. Then she looked at him steady. "No press, no pictures, no interviews. I'm here for him, not your image." He nodded once, and it mattered, because for the first time he was taking direction. That night, forced proximity became chosen proximity. They stayed within earshot of each other. Alex slept peacefully, tucked between memories and trauma, and outside his door, the two people who never planned to trust each other began to wonder what would happen if they did. The next morning, frost lined the edges of Rose Hill's windows, like the house itself was holding its breath. Gregory Johnson was already awake. Not that he'd slept. He stood in front of the security monitor in his study, eyes bloodshot, rewinding footage from every angle of the property. Nothing. No signs of the man entering. No alarms triggered. No guards reported anything unusual. It didn't make sense. He took a sip of black coffee and winced. It was cold, bitter, fitting. His assistant had emailed him a list of all staff with gate access. 2 guards, the estate manager, the private chef, and Lillian. He paused on her name. She'd only been here 3 months. No background issues, no red flags, just quiet. But quiet didn't mean safe. Or did it? Across the hallway, Lillian helped Alex get dressed. He seemed lighter this morning, still scared, still jumpy. But with her close, he smiled. He trusted her, and part of her hated that. Because trust meant attachment, and attachment meant vulnerability. And she'd promised herself she'd never feel that again. A knock at the door. Gregory. "Can I speak to you?" he asked, his voice unreadable. She nodded, walked with him down the hallway, into the sunlit sitting room. They didn't sit. He folded his arms across his chest, pacing slowly. She stood near the window, watching him like a storm on the edge of the horizon. "I ran all the footage. There's no sign of how that man got in," he started. She said nothing. But someone let him in. Still, she didn't respond. Not defensiveness, not fear. Just silence. "Lillian, who are you really?" Now her eyes met his. Not wide, not panicked, just steady. "I used to work with at-risk youth," she said, "before cleaning homes before this." Gregory blinked. "In Chicago, I was a community worker. My son, Jamal, he was shot outside a convenience store." Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes did. "I spent 2 years trying to fix a system that didn't want to be fixed, and when that broke me, I left. I cleaned houses because they didn't need me to care, just to show up, mop, and leave." A pause. "But then I met Alex." Gregory swallowed hard. Everything he thought he knew about her reshuffled in an instant. Gregory, softly. Why didn't you tell me? Lillian. Because people don't hire maids with dead sons and activist records. Gregory. I would have. Lillian, quiet. No, you wouldn't have seen me. He exhaled sharply, like the truth had punched him in the chest. She was right. He hadn't seen her at all. Later, Gregory sat alone at the kitchen island, flipping through digital access logs. A ping from his assistant lit up his phone. FYI, the estate manager's credentials were used to disable the perimeter camera feeds 2 hours before the attack. He froze. The estate manager, a man who had worked with Gregory for 7 years, a man who knew everything. Gregory's face paled. He stood, the chair scraping back against the polished floor. He'd trusted the wrong person. Meanwhile, back in the guest wing, Lillian stood by the window, watching Alex play with a puzzle. But her mind wasn't on the boy. It was on Gregory. For the first time, she wasn't sure he was the one who needed protecting. She had a feeling something worse was coming, something that would shatter everything. The fire in the Rose Hill living room had burned low, casting long amber shadows across the hardwood floor. The house for once wasn't silent from cold, but from peace. It was the first quiet moment since everything shattered. Lillian sat cross-legged on the thick Persian rug, helping Alex build a Lego rocket. His fingers were tiny but precise, his face deeply focused. Gregory leaned against the doorway, holding 2 mugs of warm tea, one for him, one for her. No suit tonight, just a sweater and slacks. He looked human. Not Mr. Johnson, just Gregory. He stepped in slowly and handed her the cup. She accepted it with a small nod. Chamomile, he said. Figured you've had enough chaos. She smirked faintly. You're not wrong. Alex looked up at his father, eyes wide. Daddy, look, it's a spaceship. Miss Lillian helped me make the fire jets. Gregory knelt beside them, gently ruffling his son's hair. Looks way cooler than anything I built at your age. For the first time in what felt like years, Gregory heard his son laugh, not politely, not nervously, but a real laugh, the kind that came from his belly, from safety. He glanced at Lillian. She wasn't smiling for show. She was just there, fully present. Calm. He studied her in the flickering light. She wasn't just brave, she was constant. Later, after Alex had gone to bed, the 2 adults sat across from each other, tea now cold but conversation slowly warming. What was he like? Gregory asked softly. Lillian didn't have to ask who he was. She let the silence stretch. Jamal was stubborn, she said, eyes distant. Smart-mouthed. Always thought he knew better than me. A soft laugh. He used to line up his toys like soldiers, always had to have them in a certain order. God forbid you moved one. Gregory smiled. Alex is like that with his stuffed animals. A pause. Do you miss him every day? He asked, voice nearly breaking. No, she said quietly. Only when I breathe. Gregory. You're stronger than anyone I know. Lillian. You don't have to be strong to survive, just tired of being broken. Gregory. Still. I don't know how you do it. Lillian, softly. You don't have to know. You just have to stay in the room. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled over the hills. But inside that room, it was the first time 2 broken people had stopped trying to hide it. Lillian looked at him. You should talk to him more, you know. Gregory blinked. Alex? She nodded. He doesn't want your money. He just wants your voice, your time, even if it's awkward, even if you don't know what to say. He stared into the fire. I don't know how to be enough for him. You're already everything, she whispered. You just forgot how to show it. For a moment it felt like the whole mansion sighed, as if it too had been waiting for this moment of honesty, of 2 people meeting not as maid and master, not as protector and employer, but as mother and father in a house that had forgotten how to hold warmth. If you've ever lost someone, or loved someone so much it made your voice catch, then you know what this moment means. The sun outside was soft, gentle even, a deceptive calm. Inside Rose Hill, it was the kind of day where you could almost forget what happened. Almost. Alex was drawing superheroes at the dining table. Lillian had just brought him a fresh sandwich, crusts cut off the way he liked. Gregory stood nearby, phone pressed to his ear. Quiet. Focused. Too focused. Understood. Forward me the full report. No, I don't want summaries. I want timestamps. Every login, every entry, especially hers. Lillian froze as the last word left his mouth. Hers? Gregory turned slightly. Eyes meeting hers, but not with softness, with calculation. I'm just being thorough. Her voice was sharp, low, controlled. You're investigating me. He paused, didn't deny it. Your access codes were used. I had to be sure. Lillian stepped closer, fury and heartbreak rising together. So after everything, after I saved your son's life, you think I could hurt him? Gregory's voice didn't rise, but his words landed like punches. People lie. People hide things. You lied about your past. What else should I overlook? Silence. Alex looked up, confused. Lillian's chest rose and fell. I didn't lie. I just didn't hand you my pain like a resume. Gregory took a step toward her, the space between them now unbearable. And what if I told you someone linked to your past was tied to the hit, that the man in custody used to work in the same organization you did? She blinked. The room spun slightly. You think I planned it? Her voice broke. That I used my son's memory, used Alex as bait. Gregory's jaw clenched. I don't know what to think anymore. That was it. The sentence that shattered the bridge they'd been building. Lillian took a slow step back, eyes burning. Lillian. You know, I thought I was imagining it. This shift in you. The way you started to see me. As more than just a maid. As someone who mattered. Gregory. You do matter. Lillian. Not enough to be believed. She turned, walking toward the hallway. Gregory moved after her. Lillian, wait. She stopped at the stairs, voice trembling but clear. No. I stayed because of Alex. I opened up because I thought I finally found a place where I wasn't just tolerated, but trusted. She looked back. But I won't stay somewhere I'm watched like a threat. Not again. She disappeared up the stairs. The silence left behind was heavier than any accusation. That night, Gregory sat alone in the living room, the house darker than usual. The fire was out. So was Alex's smile, because Lillian didn't come back down. And Alex kept asking over and over again, is she mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Where's Miss Lillian? Gregory had no answers, only guilt. The mansion echoed with absence, and for the first time since the attack, Gregory felt truly alone. The sun rose slowly over Geneva, casting a golden glow over Rose Hill's cold marble floors. But the warmth never touched the inside. Gregory sat alone in the study, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. No emails, no calls, just silence. Lillian hadn't come down, and the guest wing door remained closed. He had broken something, not because he was wrong to be cautious, but because he forgot she was a person, not a file. And that trust doesn't survive under suspicion. In the guest room, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the duffel bag she hadn't touched since she got here. She had packed her things that morning. She could leave. She should leave. But Alex's drawing sat on the nightstand beside her. A crude, sweet crayon sketch of the three of them standing under a rainbow. Him, her, Gregory. The words scrawled underneath in big, messy letters. My family. Her hands shook. She wasn't family. She was the help. And she'd been reminded of that the second Gregory flinched at her past. Still, part of her didn't want to walk away. Meanwhile, in the security room, Gregory rewound the footage again. Not of the attack, but of her. Lillian, crouching beside Alex, wiping his tears. Lillian, reading to him in the hallway. Lillian holding him like a mother when no one else dared get close. She was so much more than what he accused her of, and he knew it. He picked up his phone, stared at her number, put it down, picked it up again. No. Some things needed to be said in person. Gregory, whispering to himself, if she leaves now, she'll never come back. He stood, and for once, he didn't think about pride. Upstairs, Lillian zipped her bag. She took one last look at the room. Then, a knock, gentle, not loud, not demanding, just present. She hesitated, opened the door. Gregory stood there, not in a suit, no defense in his posture, just a man, face open, voice low. Say something, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, eyes glassy. You already said enough. A pause. But you didn't believe it. Gregory nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix this, he said honestly. Then don't try to fix it, she whispered. Just mean what you say this time. He stepped aside, clearing the hallway. Can we talk? Really talk? Lillian didn't move for a long time. Then finally, she stepped out. Not with trust, but with a thread of willingness. And sometimes, that's more powerful than forgiveness. Downstairs, Alex was in the sunroom building a new Lego city. When he saw Lillian walk in behind Gregory, his eyes lit up. Miss Lillian, you came back. She knelt beside him, pulled him into her arms. I never left, baby. I was just thinking. Gregory watched them silently, and for the first time he knew he didn't just owe her an apology. He owed her his presence, his honesty, his trust. And if he wanted either of them to stay, he'd have to choose differently this time. Rose Hill Mansion had changed, not physically. The walls still echoed, the chandeliers still sparkled, and the fireplace still glowed. But something inside it felt alive again. Alex now laughed freely. He spent more time in the sunroom than behind locked doors, and whenever he called for Lillian, it was no longer out of fear, but joy. She stayed. Gregory had asked, not begged, not demanded. He just showed up every morning, every evening, with words that finally meant something. And slowly the mansion stopped feeling like a fortress. It started to feel like a home. But the question still lingered. Who sent the assassin, and why? That answer was still locked behind security layers, until it wasn't. A phone call came in. Gregory sat at his desk, Lillian nearby, folding clean linens on the armchair in the study. Alex was upstairs drawing again, his newest project, a comic book about a maid who fought crime with a frying pan. Gregory put the phone on speaker. Sir, his assistant's voice crackled, we got a full ID on the man from the attack. Gregory leaned forward. Lillian paused. Name's Derek Monroe, ex-military, private security for hire, formerly contracted by... A pause. The Dover Group, your father's old firm. Gregory's stomach sank. My father's company shut down years ago. Yes, sir, but not before transferring their client portfolio to a private holding group. That group was headed by someone named Patricia Ellis. The blood drained from Gregory's face. Lillian stepped closer. Her hand gently rested on the edge of the desk. Who is Patricia? Gregory didn't answer. His voice came out cracked, wounded. My sister. Silence fell. Not the cold kind. The kind that came with betrayal that rewrote your entire childhood. Why? Lillian asked softly. Gregory stared out the window, eyes burning. She always thought she should have inherited control, not me. My father promised it to me before he died. She sued, lost, swore it wasn't over. He shook his head. She didn't want Alex dead. She wanted me shattered. Alex was leverage, Lillian exhaled. And what will you do now? Whatever it takes to protect him, Gregory said. No hesitation. He looked at her. And that includes protecting the only person who's ever truly shown up for him. I've spent years believing money could fix everything, but no amount of wealth has ever made me feel what I feel when I see you with my son. Lillian, gentle. Then maybe it's time to stop spending money and start spending time. Later that evening, in the same room where it all began, the fire crackled. Alex sat curled beside Lillian on the couch, head on her shoulder. Gregory walked in, No suit, no briefcase, just holding the teddy bear he dropped that night. He handed it to Alex. "Think you forgot something?" The boy beamed, then reached for Gregory's hand, tugging him onto the couch beside them. And just like that, the three of them sat there. No words, just breath, warmth, healing, the kind that money could never buy. If this story reminded you that sometimes family isn't about blood, if you've ever been saved by someone who wasn't supposed to, then do one thing. Subscribe. Because you're not just watching stories here, you're becoming part of them. He built his life to control everything, but tonight, his maid was holding his children like they were hers, because when they cried out, sick and alone, he never answered. Two tiny boys, wrapped against her chest like a lifeline, while the man they belonged to stood frozen in his own home. The elevator doors whispered open into the private Atlanta penthouse, polished, pristine, and cold. Michael Davies stepped inside, luggage still in hand, the scent of jet fuel clinging to his suit. He hadn't told a soul he was coming back early. He never did. Because control wasn't something he shared, it was something he enforced. And tonight, he just wanted silence, stillness, the order he'd built his empire on. But from the kitchen, a sound interrupted everything. A lullaby, soft, hummed, followed by the gentle coo of babies. Michael's brow furrowed. His penthouse was supposed to be empty, cleaned, maintained, not lived in. He dropped his bag and moved toward the kitchen, each step sharper than the last. And there, under the soft track lights and skyline reflection, stood Angela Chapman, 27 years old, orange uniform, yellow gloves still on, and strapped to her chest were his sons, Matt and Max, 2 years old, sleeping, breathing unevenly, one of them burning with a fever. Michael stopped cold, his voice cut through the room like glass. "What the hell is this?" Angela didn't jump, didn't apologize. She just looked up. They were sick. The nanny left. They wouldn't stop crying. Her tone was even, but her eyes, they carried hours of exhaustion and something more, conviction. Michael stared at her, at his sons, trying to process the scene in front of him. The sling, the closeness, the quiet breathing against her heart. He hadn't touched them in days, hadn't known they were ill, hadn't even checked. Everything about this was wrong. His rules, his boundaries, shattered. She wasn't family, she wasn't supposed to hold them. And yet, they looked safe, calmer than he'd seen them in weeks, held. For a moment, barely a breath, something stirred deep inside him. A flash. Of fevered nights in his own childhood, of calling for help in a house full of people, and no one coming. He swallowed hard, but the knot in his throat didn't move. Angela stood in front of him, not defiant, not afraid, just present, and holding the two most fragile parts of his life, like someone who'd already chosen to care when he hadn't. But before we begin, tap that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you that real love doesn't need permission. It just shows up. He hadn't meant to come home tonight. The Zurich deal closed early. The jet was already waiting, and for once he didn't feel like smiling for cameras in Paris. Michael Davies just wanted quiet. Instead, he walked into a storm he didn't see coming. Angela stood completely still. The babies were tucked tight against her. Sweat dampened their curls, their cheeks flushed with fever. Michael's voice came again, lower now, but no less sharp. "Where's the nanny?" Angela didn't blink. Gone. Walked out. No note. Just left. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. His eyes flicked to the boys. One of them whimpered in his sleep. Angela shifted her stance to cradle him. Michael's hands curled into fists. "You weren't hired to play mother," he said. "No," she replied. "I was hired to clean floors, but I found them screaming, burning up, alone." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just said the truth out loud. And it landed harder than a scream ever could. Michael moved past her and into the nursery. He flicked on the light. It was a mess. Half-eaten baby food, unopened medicine, a monitor blinking red. The nanny's phone still charging in the corner. No explanation, no plan. Just absence. He turned slowly, jaw tight. "You should have called me." Angela stepped into the doorway, still holding the boys. "I did. 3 times. Left voicemails. No response." He looked away, the weight of it settling in. Silence stretched thin between them. Only the sound of Max's soft breath broke through. Angela rocked slightly, instinctively. Michael noticed how the child relaxed into her without hesitation, without fear. That trust, it wasn't built overnight, and he had no idea when it began, or worse, how long it had taken to form without him. "You had no right to touch them," he said, barely above a whisper. Angela's grip didn't loosen. "They needed to be held." Her voice cracked, just for a moment. "I wasn't thinking about rights, Mr. Davies. I was thinking about fevers, and silence, and what it means to cry with no one coming." That last line hit deeper than she probably intended, because he remembered it too, being 5 years old, curled up in a cold room, body burning, calling for his father, and only hearing the echo of his own voice. Michael cleared his throat, straightened his spine. The warmth rising in his chest felt foreign and dangerous. Angela stepped forward, slow, careful. "If you're going to fire me," she said quietly, "do it now, but just know I didn't hold them to overstep. I held them because someone had to." Matt stirred. Tiny fingers curled around the collar of her uniform. Angela glanced down, didn't flinch, didn't ask for forgiveness. Michael looked at the boy's hand, then back at her, and for a breathless second, the room held still. He didn't fire her. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out. The door didn't slam. It clicked softly shut, but it echoed like thunder down the hall. Michael didn't sleep, not because of noise, but because of silence, a silence that echoed louder than any argument. He stood in the dark hallway outside the nursery, listening to their breaths, to hers, and to the voice in his head saying, "You weren't there." By morning, the twins were quieter. Their fever had dropped slightly. Angela hadn't left. She was in the kitchen when he entered, still in uniform, hair pulled back, yellow gloves tossed on the counter beside a bottle of children's ibuprofen. She didn't greet him, didn't even look up. "You should have told me sooner," he said. Angela turned, slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I did. You didn't pick up." Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came after too many nights of doing everything alone. Michael pulled a chair back from the table, sat. "Where's the nanny now?" Angela didn't move. She quit, left a voicemail, said she couldn't handle the crying, said it wasn't worth being ignored every day. She reached into the drawer and slid her phone across the counter. The voicemail was still there. Michael didn't play it, he just stared at the screen and for a moment didn't know what to say. Angela stepped closer. "I found them soaked in sweat, Mr. Davies, screaming. Their diapers hadn't been changed in hours. The monitor was on mute. The nanny's things were packed before she left." Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes burned. "I didn't know what else to do. I held them." Michael looked down at his hands. The same ones that signed billion-dollar contracts, built towers, restructured companies with a pen stroke, hands that hadn't held his sons in over a week. "You should have waited," he said. Angela's mouth twitched, not a smile, something colder. She stepped around the counter slowly until they were eye to eye. "Would you have preferred I left them there, shaking, screaming, burning up while I polished your counters?" Her voice didn't crack, but his resolve did. He stood quickly, like he needed to shift the power back into his posture. "You crossed a line." "No," she said quietly. "I stepped in when no one else did." A long silence followed, the kind that made every breath feel like a choice. Michael turned away, walked to the window. Midtown Atlanta shimmered beyond the glass, orderly, towering, obedient, his city, but not his home, not anymore. Angela's voice came softly from behind him. "I don't need to stay. I came to get my things. I'll go after that." He didn't turn around, didn't stop her. And yet, he heard Matt's cry from the nursery, high-pitched, frantic. Angela was already moving before Michael could react. Her footsteps down the hall were soft, familiar, like she'd done it before, like she knew the way. He stayed where he was, motionless, silent, staring out over the skyline he owned, and feeling something new, not anger, not power, something quieter and harder to name. Angela didn't wait for permission. She packed her things in silence. A small duffel, neatly zipped, the uniform folded, her shoes placed side by side at the door. She didn't ask if she was fired. She already knew. Michael stood in the hallway, watching her through the open kitchen archway. He wanted to say something. He didn't know what. Not thank you, not sorry, not stay. Words were easy in boardrooms, not here. The twins had fallen back asleep. A nurse was scheduled to arrive by noon. The house would be clean again, quiet again, just the way he liked it. So why did it all feel wrong? Angela zipped the bag shut. Still no eye contact, still no plea. Just a woman with a steady back, doing what needed to be done. Again. Michael stepped forward, but his voice stayed behind. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was crowded, with everything he hadn't done, everything she had. Angela finally turned. "You don't have to explain." Her tone wasn't bitter, just tired. "You hired me to clean, not to care. I understand." He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptible. "That's not what this is." She raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Not yet. Angela lifted her bag, walked past him, paused at the nursery door, looked in one last time. Matt shifted in his sleep. She lingered, just a moment, then started down the hall. Michael watched her walk away, and something in his chest moved, a slow ache, like grief, but older, like it had been waiting. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he saw it again. A different hallway, marble floors, echoes of footsteps too far away. A little boy with a fever, crying into a pillow, hoping the maid would come check on him. She never did, because she wasn't allowed. He opened his eyes. Angela was at the door now, hand on the knob. She didn't turn it yet. "You were right," he said quietly. She paused, still didn't look back. "About what?" Michael swallowed. His voice came out softer than he expected. "About waiting, about crying and no one showing up. I know what that feels like." Angela turned then, slowly, her expression unreadable. But her eyes saw something he wasn't ready to show. "Then maybe you understand why I did what I did." Michael nodded once, just once, but it said more than anything he'd said in days. Angela looked down, the duffel bag strap still in her hand, still unsure. She didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, uncomfortable, unfinished, but not broken. And somewhere down the hallway, a baby stirred again. A soft, fragile sound, searching for something that felt like home. The door never opened. Angela stood there for a long time, hand still on the knob, her bag by her side. She didn't move, and neither did he. Michael didn't speak right away, didn't rush to explain himself, didn't offer forgiveness. What he offered was something rarer. Space. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Sit down." Not an order, not a command. Just words, carried with something unfamiliar. "Respect." Angela hesitated, then let go of the doorknob, walked slowly back to the kitchen, dropped her bag beside the counter, and sat. The room was still, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustle of wind against the windows. Michael leaned against the counter, arms folded. Then finally he asked, "Why are you still here?" Angela met his eyes. "Because I don't walk out on people who need me." Her voice was steady, measured, but her hands, she kept them clasped tightly in her lap. Michael nodded once, then sank into the chair across from her. The silence stretched again, but this time it didn't feel hostile. It felt necessary. He tilted his head slightly. "Where are you from?" Angela blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Haven't been asked that in a while." Michael waited. She exhaled slowly, like she wasn't sure where to begin. "Small town outside Macon. Dirt roads. One stoplight. My mom worked night shifts at the diner, then cleaned houses during the day." She paused. "I was the oldest, so when my siblings got sick I stayed home. Learned how to sponge fevers before I learned algebra." Michael's eyes softened. Angela continued, voice quieter now. "Got a scholarship to Clark Atlanta. Made it halfway through before my mom's kidneys started to fail. She couldn't work. I dropped out. Took every job I could find." She looked down at her hands. "Cleaning was the only thing I didn't need a degree for." Michael swallowed but said nothing. Angela glanced at him. "People think being a maid is just mops and bleach, but sometimes it's holding a child who won't stop crying, or staying late so the mother can cry alone in her room without guilt." She looked away again. "It's not just floors, Mr. Davies. It's knowing how to be invisible, and when not to be." Michael stared at her for a long time. This woman, who he'd barely noticed for months, had lived 1,000 quiet battles behind that uniform, and she didn't owe him a single piece of it. Yet she gave it anyway. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother. Is she okay?" Angela's mouth pressed into a thin line, then shook her head. "Dialysis 3 times a week. She's tired. A beat. But I can't let her fall apart. She's done that for me enough times already." Michael looked at her, really looked, not at the maid, but at the daughter, the sister, the fighter, and for a man who had built walls higher than his skyscrapers. He felt something unfamiliar. Admiration. Angela stood slowly. "I wasn't trying to disrespect your rules, I just couldn't leave them like that." She started to reach for her bag. Michael didn't stop her, but he didn't look away either. Behind them the twins stirred again. A soft cry echoed down the hall. Angela turned her head, waited. Michael didn't move. He just watched her. And for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to be needed for something more than money. Michael stood in the nursery doorway. It was quiet, too quiet. 2 cribs, matching. Untouched sheets folded at the corners, bottles lined up on the table like inventory. Everything was in its place, except him. The nurse hadn't arrived yet. Angela was gone, just for the morning, she said. But her absence echoed through the room like a missing note in a melody. He stepped inside. Slowly. Max stirred. Michael froze. The baby's eyes fluttered open, half-lidded and glassy. A soft whimper escaped his lips, then a cough, then a cry. Michael looked around like someone had triggered an alarm. No Angela, no nanny, no buffer, just him, and the weight of a child needing more than he knew how to give. He reached down awkwardly, hands stiff, lifted Max from the crib with the caution of someone handling glass. The baby cried louder. Michael cradled him, wrongly. He could feel it. Nothing about it felt natural. He sat in the rocking chair, stiff and unsteady, bouncing Max in uneven rhythm. "It's okay," he muttered under his breath, more for himself than the child. "You're all right. You're okay." But the baby wasn't calming, and neither was he. His shirt soaked quickly, warm against his chest. Max's skin was hot, his forehead damp. Michael panicked for a second, heart racing. Where was the thermometer? Where was the nurse? Where was the woman who made this look easy? He reached for his phone, then stopped, put it down, and looked back at Max. The baby's tiny fingers were curled into his collar, gripping him with more certainty than he felt. Something in that small hand cracked through him. Not a word, not a thought. Just a memory. A hallway. A marble floor. A smaller version of himself, wrapped in a blanket too big, calling out into silence. He hadn't known it then. But what he felt that night, that burning loneliness, that was the beginning of everything. The deals, the walls, the distance, all of it built to protect the part of him that still remembered not being held. Michael looked down at his son. Matt was stirring now too, soft cries beginning to build. For a moment he didn't know what to do. Then he stood, Max in one arm, walked to the second crib, and with far less grace than he'd like, picked up Matt. One arm for each boy, their warmth against his chest, their weight on his shoulders, their cries softening, not disappearing but changing. He sat back down, both boys pressed close. No nurse, no maid, no help, just him. For once, that wasn't terrifying. It was grounding. Matt hiccuped, then stilled. Max nestled deeper. Michael leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The silence returned. But it didn't feel empty this time. It felt full. His phone buzzed on the side table. He ignored it. Down the hall, the front door clicked open. Angela stepped in, slow and cautious, unsure of what she'd find. She turned the corner and froze. Michael didn't look up. He just kept rocking. Two boys asleep in his arms. No words. Just motion. Just effort. Angela stepped into the room, eyes soft. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Whatever she was going to say could wait. Because finally, he wasn't just holding them. He was choosing to. The boys were asleep. Angela watched from the hallway, arms crossed lightly over her chest. Michael hadn't said a word, but he didn't need to. The way he held them spoke louder than anything else. Later that afternoon, the nurse finally arrived, young, professional, emotionally distant. Angela stepped aside as she was briefed. But Michael noticed it immediately. The room didn't feel the same. The air felt thinner without her presence near the boys. He found her in the laundry room. She was folding blankets, perfectly, quietly, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He leaned in the doorway. "Why didn't you tell me she quit?" Angela looked up, didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "I tried. You were on a plane, then in meetings, then unreachable." She said it without blame. Just fact. Michael nodded slowly, then asked the question that had been sitting on his chest since last night. "Why didn't you just let it go?" Angela paused, folded the last blanket. "Because I don't leave children crying in a room alone. Not anymore." Michael didn't push, but something about her words stayed with him. And later, in his office, glass-walled and miles above the city, he picked up his phone. "Find out what happened with the nanny," he told his assistant. Everything. The report came back within the hour. Angela had been reported, days ago, for getting too attached. The nanny had sent an email to HR, said Angela overstepped boundaries, said she warned her, said she was told to stay in her lane. Angela ignored it, and held the twins anyway, even after being warned, even knowing it might cost her job. Michael read the message twice, then opened the HR logs. Sure enough, a formal warning, filed, delivered, never mentioned to him. Angela never said a word. She had taken the risk and the consequence. Also, two children wouldn't feel what she once did. Alone, unheld, unheard. He closed his laptop and just sat there, staring out at a skyline that suddenly looked hollow. He'd rewarded loyalty his entire life, with money, contracts, titles. But this was something else. The kind of loyalty that doesn't ask permission. The kind that steps into fire quietly, because it's the right thing to do. The kind that makes rules bend, because love doesn't follow protocol. A knock on the office door broke the stillness. Angela stepped in, holding a bottle of formula and a baby monitor. Matt woke up. She hesitated. "I can give him to the nurse if you'd prefer." Michael looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. "No. Bring him here." She crossed the room slowly and handed the bottle over. Michael cradled his son in one arm and took the formula in the other. He didn't ask for help. He tried, fumbled, laughed quietly under his breath. And Angela just watched. Not as a maid, not as staff, but as someone who had been there first, when no one else was. She turned to leave. Michael stopped her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Angela looked over her shoulder. Would it have made a difference? She didn't wait for the answer. She already knew it. The next morning, Angela arrived expecting distance, boundaries re-established, emotions reset. She was prepared to resume as nothing more than the maid, if she was still wanted at all. What she wasn't prepared for was an envelope on the counter, with her name on it. She looked around. The twins were in the nursery with the nurse. The house was still, humming faintly with morning light. She opened the envelope. Inside, a formal offer letter. Not for cleaning staff, but for household care liaison. Higher pay, clear authority, flexible schedule. And a second page, another name. Her mother. A fully arranged care plan. Transportation. Dialysis. In-home nursing. Paid for. In full. Angela didn't move for a long time. She read it again. Twice. Then heard footsteps. Michael stood in the hallway, one hand in his pocket, watching her read. No suit this morning, just a sweater. Casual, out of place on him, like someone halfway between who he was and who he might become. "You said you don't walk out on people who need you." He nodded toward the paper in her hand. "That offer, and that's me saying I don't either." Angela blinked, not shocked, but stunned. She set the paper down slowly. "Why?" Michael exhaled. "Because you showed up when I didn't. And because they trust you, maybe more than they trust me." A beat. "And because I don't want to keep building walls they'll have to tear down someday." Angela crossed her arms, but it wasn't defensive. It was grounding. "You're changing a lot of rules." Michael gave a faint smile. "They weren't working." She studied him for a moment, trying to find the catch, the agenda, the performance. There wasn't one. Just a man finally stepping into a role he had never been taught how to hold. "This isn't charity," she said. "I'm not a cause. I'm not broken." Michael's voice didn't waver. "I know. That's why I'm asking, not offering. If you'll stay." A pause. "Not as a maid, not to babysit, but to help build something better." Angela looked down. Her fingers brushed the corner of the offer letter. Matt's laughter echoed faintly from the nursery. She glanced toward the sound, then back at Michael. "I'll stay," she said softly, "but not to fix your life." Michael nodded. "No, just to be part of it." Another silence passed between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was alive. Angela picked up the papers, tucked them neatly back into the envelope. "You'll still need a real nanny," she said. Michael smiled. "I need a lot of things." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "They'll still cry in the middle of the night, still throw tantrums, still need to be held when it's inconvenient." Michael's smile faded, but not from resistance, from understanding. "Good." Angela gave him a look, one that said, "We'll see," then disappeared down the hall. Michael stood alone in the kitchen, hands in his pockets, his empire still intact, but the foundation beneath it, finally shifting. It started small. Michael didn't announce it. He didn't ask. He just showed up. First it was breakfast. He sat at the table while Angela fed the twins in their high chairs, clumsy spoonfuls and sippy cups gone rogue. He watched, silent, still. She noticed, but didn't comment. The next morning, he was the one warming bottles. Angela raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. "They won't drink if it's too hot. I learned that yesterday." She didn't say, "Good job." She didn't need to. Days passed. Routine shifted. Michael took calls in shorter bursts, stopped checking his phone when the twins were in the room, started asking questions not about numbers, about them. Why does Matt cry before naps but not bedtime? Does Max always suck his thumb when he's tired? Angela answered without judgment, with ease, like someone who'd learned to read needs before words existed. One evening she found him in the nursery, Matt on his chest, Max curled at his side, books scattered on the floor. Michael looked up, startled. "We were reading. Or I was trying." Angela didn't laugh. She picked up a board book and sat beside them. She didn't tell him what to do. She showed him how to hold the bottle differently, how to swaddle without too tight a grip, how to recognize that Max's cough wasn't a cold, it was just a dry room. Michael listened, actually listened. And slowly, he changed. One night, the boys were fussy. Angela was rocking Max in the hallway when Michael emerged from the dark, Matt already in his arms. She paused. He did too, just for a breath. Then they stood there side by side, rocking, in sync. No words, just motion, just presence. Later, in the kitchen, Angela poured herself a glass of water. Michael leaned against the counter, his voice came quiet. "I used to think being present was a waste of time." She looked up. "Because you were always chasing something." Michael shook his head slowly. "Because no one was ever present for me. I didn't think it mattered." Angela didn't pity him. She didn't soften. She just held his gaze and said, "Then maybe now's your chance to be what you never had." The words didn't pierce. They landed. Heavy. True. Michael looked down at the tile, then back up. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not comfort, just understanding. Angela placed her glass in the sink. "They'll wake again in 3 hours, just a warning." Michael smiled faintly. "I'll be ready." She moved toward the hallway, paused. "And Mr. Davies?" He raised an eyebrow. She almost smiled. "You're getting better." He didn't respond, but long after she left the room, he stood there, still, letting the words settle in a place that had never held praise before. Weeks passed, but not in the way they used to, rushing forward, stacked with deals and time zones. Now, the days moved differently, measured not by meetings but by milestones. A first laugh, a new tooth, an arm reaching up for him, without hesitation. Michael's home didn't look different, but it felt it. The lights were softer. The silence was gentler, and the air no longer carried the weight of absence. One morning he walked into the kitchen and stopped without realizing why. Angela was at the table, feeding the twins. Music played faintly in the background, an old jazz record spinning low and warm. Max banged a spoon against his tray. Matt giggled, face covered in applesauce. Angela's hair was pulled back, sleeves rolled up, humming to the rhythm of the chaos. And somehow, it was beautiful. Alive. Michael stepped closer, pulled out a chair. For the first time in years, he sat. Not for business, not for obligation, just to be there. Angela looked up, gave a small nod, said nothing. She didn't need to. He watched as she wiped Matt's chin with practiced ease. He reached over to help, and for once, didn't second-guess himself. Later that afternoon, Angela's phone buzzed. A video call from her mother, smiling, color in her cheeks again. The nurse waved from the background. Michael walked by, caught the tail end of the conversation. He didn't interrupt, just listened, and quietly smiled to himself. The boys had started crawling now, which meant bruises, bumped heads, and constant supervision. Michael baby-proofed the entire living room, personally. Angela caught him rearranging outlet covers and muttered under her breath, "Control freak." He looked up. Former. They both laughed, and it stayed in the room long after the sound faded. That evening, Angela was closing the dishwasher when she turned to find him watching her. He wasn't trying to intimidate or evaluate. He was just watching. "You okay?" she asked. Michael nodded. "I was just thinking." "About what?" A pause. Then, what this house used to feel like, and what it feels like now. Angela didn't press, but she stayed, leaning against the counter, arms folded, letting the moment breathe. Michael looked around. The fingerprints on the fridge, the toys scattered on the floor, a burp cloth hanging off a chair. His past self would have fired someone for less. Now? He couldn't imagine it any other way. He ran a hand over his face, then looked at her. "You changed this place." Angela tilted her head. "You let it change." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just still, like peace. Later that night, Michael stood in the nursery doorway. The twins slept deeply, curled against their blankets, nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall. Angela passed behind him on her way to the hall. He spoke without turning. "Thank you." She paused. "For what?" He turned, voice quiet. "For staying." Angela nodded once, then disappeared down the hall. Michael lingered in the doorway. The empire he built still stood. But now, so did something else, something soft, something real. Money built these walls, but love cracked them open. And in that light, he finally saw what mattered.